Dear friends, welcome to our session where we're going to be giving you some exam tips on preparing for the YPP. My name is Tanya Lim, and I'm from Malaysia, and I passed the exam in administration in the job family in 2013.
Hello everyone, my name is Charles Karanja Ndiani. I was an internal candidate for working for the UN, YPP, 2016, I believe, in information systems and technology. So that's when I did my exam, that's when I passed.
And my name is Claudia. I'm a German national. I did the exam in 2014 in human rights, and I'm now working for UN Habitat.
Great. So we've got administration, information systems, and human rights. I think that's pretty comprehensive. So can you tell us a little bit about your experiences? For me personally, I found it very intensive, very long. I think we were discussing earlier it would take about 4 hours.
4.5 hours.
4.5 hours, depending on some of the organizing. If you have larger candidates, a larger group, you might need to spend a little bit more time with the administration before and after. But as a whole, I learned a lot about this, about the exam process, just doing it on its own. Preparing was nerve-wracking for me, but I think the most important thing is to remain calm and to think through the questions rather than rote memorization and then trying to answer the questions based on what you've prepared. I think for me what helped the most was to try and understand what the questions was asking and to try and think about it from the examiner's perspective. So what about you guys?
Well, actually, listening to you talk right now, I'm very intrigued about what experience must have been, because for myself, I was an internal candidate, which means that I already work for the UN in Nairobi. And so preparation was a bit different. I don't know, I actually want to discuss whether you had a study timetable like I had, and how you actually went around. Did you do any group therapy, or did you just go at it solo? Did you have like a group you were working with? In Nairobi, I think we did get together, a few of us, and every other day, especially in the last month before the exam, we would actually quiz each other and present material about what certain areas in IT. I don't know about your experience.
Maybe just jumping in, I think the first point you make, that it's an enhanced procedure, that's really true. And I think perhaps one of the mistakes that people commonly make is that they don't take the exam as seriously, but it is intense and you do have to study. And I don't think there's a point in trying if you have not studied and if you haven't studied intensely. So my first tip, I guess, would be to properly study and to take the exam seriously. But I think group study is really useful. For me personally, I'm not someone who studies well in a group. I don't like quizzing each other. It just makes me more nervous because I feel like there's so much I don't know. So for me...
In fact, I want to reiterate something that Claude said that was very important. I guess people do underestimate how much you have to study. They really do underestimate it, and you're right. If you've not studied, it might not be worth your time to actually sit down for 4.5 hours and not have much to write. That said, your point about knowing the internal rules and regulations of the UN and that being a disadvantage for you that you did not know, I actually think it's the other way around. The UN is trying to hire people from outside the UN. So you go into that question, into that paper, and you try to answer it according to how the UN does things. I am not a marker, but I suspect that would actually get you less. So I think being an external candidate, it actually helped that you had the best practice from the field and didn't have to worry about whether or not you knew the actual UN rules and regulations. So I think that was something that I wanted to point out. Something else that came out for me when I did the exam in 2016 compared to the previous years, because I think they had posted some sample papers, is that there is now an emphasis on actual practicalities. You no longer just give answers by rote. I don't know if this is something that you guys experienced, But that for me is what I noticed when I looked at the past papers and looked at what they gave us. It was now about problem solving and actually doing it, as opposed to, so your actual technical skills are being tested much more deeply than they were before. However, they might have changed that with this magnet polnet jamming of different disciplines. They might now go back to being more generalistic. But that was what my discovery was when I did the paper, was that you really had to have that technical know-how and know exactly what you're talking about, as opposed to before, when all you had to do was just answer, what is this? What is MPLS? What is, the OSI model? It's not a matter of
I don't know what
is.
those things are.
Sorry, I'm just talking from an IT perspective. Sorry about that, but I just give you an example of how you just make definitions and just give an answer to that definition. Whereas now you had to actually use that MPLS to solve a problem in a networking.
That's definitely what my exam was like as well. So that wasn't just giving definitions; it was giving answers to questions. So it was problem questions essentially, where you would be able to demonstrate your skill level. I mean, the only other tip perhaps I would have is to be clear on time management, both before the exam and during the exam, because there's a lot to get through. So don't get hung up on one question because you need to finish everything. That's important. And the same beforehand. I mean, now I'm assuming it's a bit late, but it's good to have a good study timetable, like you were saying, so you know what you're going through. Yeah.
That's a very good point. So tell me, how did you do the exam? Because how did you manage your time?
Funnily enough, the guy next to me didn't have a watch, so we had to share my watch, because somehow the exam room didn't have a watch. So we had to put it in the middle and go from there. I think in the guidelines that I had received, there was some suggestions on how to do it. So I did the multiple choice first, because back then that was the first step to be eliminated. So once you got the multiple choice, then they would only mark the essays once you got through the multiple choice. So I did that first. Then I did the essays, and I assumed the summary would be the easiest, so I did that last, because I only had, in the end, 15 minutes, and I managed to do it in 15 minutes. So that's how I structured myself.
It's amazing. I'm sure there's a German word for that. Ability to use
Efficiency.
Yeah, for me, what I found was really helpful in getting through the free text questions was the multi-choice questions can trip you up because some of them are very, very similar, like the answers, so you need to read them quite carefully 2-3 times in a very MBA style format, like GMAT style. So, but I found structuring your thoughts right from the start, building that framework, how you're going to write your essay answers, really helpful, and prioritizing rather than just preparing these essays and then repeating them in the answer sheets. It's to sort of think through, write a structure, plan the essay, so you know, okay, I've got 5 minutes to write this paragraph and another 5 minutes to write the next paragraph for this heading. And once you do that, that's helpful. Also, a tip would be to pick on what are the emerging priorities in your job family within the UN, the key concerns, the key emerging issues, what is the latest trends. I think anything, like for recently the Secretary General released his reform agenda, which was approved by the General Assembly. You need to understand how that relates to strategic directions for your job family, things like that. So if you can pick out key aspects, key reports, key themes within your job family that's relevant to those priorities, that would really give you a huge bonus, I found.
Yeah, there's something that I wanted to point out to you guys out there, and this is an issue of the nasty surprises that are waiting for you during the exam. And the nasty surprises, again reiterating on a point that we made earlier, that Tanya made earlier, on whether or not there's an advantage for you to work for the UN and do this exam. And what I found, and especially for anybody who's doing YPP from inside the organization, you might actually find it's a bit debilitating for you in the UN. And the reason is because the UN is a very structured hierarchical system where you tend to stick into the department you're in, and that's where you function. And it's almost like you operate in silos of information and only trade information with other departments and sections. For example, I work at RMS, which is Resource Management, which was the IMIS system before Umoja came in. And we then had to liaise with other people in IMS, infrastructure management, and in client services. We did not do those things directly ourselves. And because of that, you find that you're actually cut off from some of the knowledge that should be in your ken. And that was it was a nasty surprise in one question when you all of a sudden get questions on the Unix filing system, which is like not something you usually work with on a day-to-day basis. And if you've not had that experience, it can really throw you off. So I think if you came from the private sector, you find that there's more demand on you to be multifaceted in your discipline, while here you could find you're pushed into a corner where you just know one thing and know it very, very well. But outside of that, you become very, very loose. So, so then I would just suggest that you definitely need to read widely and actually try to up your skills in other sections as well, because those will come as nasty surprises to you. If you've not had the pleasure of working in multiple disciplines, you might find yourself in a bit of a spot.
That actually happened to me as well, because I was quite specific in the area of human rights that I was working on. But the way I addressed it was, firstly, I did the prioritization of what I thought would be the emerging issues that you mentioned. And then I found relevant experts in those fields. And I basically had 2 weeks where I had lunch dates every single day. I paid for those lunches, and I told everyone, like, right, I'll pay for your lunch. You tell me what the key issues are, what documents you think are like the condensed version that I should read, and you give me an update what you think the key priorities in this field coming up are and where human rights is going in that section. And in fact, one of the questions that I prepared for was around internet equality and access and how that affects, you know, discrimination and like entrenched discrimination. And yeah, so that's something that I had lunch with someone. And when I was writing the question, I remembered the lunch and I remembered the details that that person gave me. So maybe don't be afraid to reach out for help and see if you can find an expert that would be willing to have lunch with you. I found people are surprisingly nice and generous with their knowledge, especially if you're humble when you ask. So I think asking is always good.
Any study tips?
Just do it.
Prepare,
Yes,
but don't
do it.
over prepare and stress yourself out that you have a you don't have a relaxed, focused exam experience, because that's very important. You need to be relaxed and focused, and you need to know your stuff. So prepare, talk to as many people. I totally agree. Really try and understand from a technical point of view, but also from a breadth of view as well. And leverage on those experiences. If you have any friends in the UN, talk to them, and friends in the sector and the program aspect also. I totally agree. And think a little bit outside the box, which might be interesting also.
And bring some high protein snacks to the exam.
Yeah, food.
Well, high protein, I say sugar, chocolate.
I don't think, yeah, but sugar you get like, you know, it's better to have constant energy rather than plummeting. So I would say protein.
Something that works for you personally.
Something that works for you
whatever
personally. Yeah,
want.
that's not a bad idea. You should go with everything. Handwriting tips. My handwriting is
It's
awful.
computerized now, isn't it?
Not yet. Just upon it is computerized.
Oh, okay,
so
fair
the other guys still have to, you know,
Oh, poor souls.
write for
That's
4.5
what we have to do.
hours.
Oh, yeah.
Get a cramp. My handwriting is atrocious because I'm always on the computer.
Yeah.
So you know how to do like lessons. You have to like every week. You say 1 hour of writing. I don't know.
I did my notes in handwriting, so all my study notes were in a handwritten notebook. So I feel like that helped because I was used to writing so much.
Oh, I did the same thing, but I can't read my own handwriting.
Oh, well,
I don't
yeah.
know how the examiners read what I was writing.
For your time.
So thank you for your time. It's been
Good luck.
Good luck. It's going to be intense. It's going to be hellish, and but it's worth it. I think
But
you
also,
should
I
do
think if it's meant to be, it's meant to be. It's so competitive that if you're meant to be here, you're meant to be here. So you can do it.
And try and enjoy it if you can.
Yeah. I think there's one last thing I think I want to point out. I think you should be passionate about your subject matter. I think
That helps
it's
with the
really-
studying, yeah.
It helps with the studying because I remember for myself, I actually was remembering stuff that I'd learned earlier. It was very enjoyable to remember some of these things. I might not have used them maybe in the last year or so, but it was still very nice and exciting to know that stuff. And I think that also makes it much easier to
Remember, yeah.
remember the material.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much.